Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The summer sun beat down on the upscale neighborhood of Clearwater, Florida. The lawns were immaculate, the houses large and modern, and the neighbors observed each other with a politeness that was sometimes icy. But behind the perfect facades, certain tensions simmered, silent and deep. Emily Thompson, a white woman in her 50s, known for her arrogance and prejudice, had never hidden her contempt for those she considered different. Her gaze often scanned the neighboring houses, as if to check that everything was proper according to her standards. That day, she had spotted the pool of the Johnsons, a respected and discreet black family who had recently moved into the neighborhood. The reflection in the crystal-clear water and the shade of the palm trees seemed to beckon her, but not for an innocent swim. She wanted to humiliate them and demonstrate her supposed superiority. Without knocking, Emily slipped into the garden, her smug air and mocking smile following her. The Johnson family was there, enjoying a peaceful afternoon. Mr. Johnson was reading on his deck chair, Mrs. Johnson was preparing refreshments, and their children were playing a few feet from the pool. Emily, oblivious to all politeness or boundaries, dove into the water with a burst of laughter that echoed throughout the garden. "Oh, look at that," she exclaimed mockingly. "It looks like you need a little supervision." The children jumped, Mrs. Johnson frowned, and Mr. Johnson rose slowly, his face grim. He knew Emily had no permission. But more than the physical intrusion, what burned within him was the contempt and the implicit racism in her every word. Emily continued to mock them, commenting on their lifestyle, their house, their way of life that doesn't really fit in with this neighborhood. Every word was a provocation. Neighbors who happened to be passing by glanced in surprise, some suppressing an embarrassed laugh, others shocked by the blatant arrogance. For Mr. Johnson, this was the last straw. He took a deep breath, feeling anger rising, but he held it back. This moment wasn't just about water or property, it was about dignity. He knew he had to act, but not impulsively. His decision, he felt, had to be firm, irreversible, and above all, it had to send a clear message: no one has the right to violate your space or disrespect you with impunity. As Emily splashed around, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed, Mr. Johnson silently formed a plan in his mind. The swimming pool, a symbol of relaxation and leisure, was about to become the stage for a lesson Emily would never forget. After Emily Thompson's humiliating intrusion, Mr. Johnson stood motionless for a moment, watching the pool. The shimmering water reflected not only the sun, but also the rising tension in his chest. Each of Emily's laughs landed like an invisible slap. He knew he couldn't let this go. He walked towards the house, his steps measured, his fists slightly clenched. In the living room, his wife, Sarah Johnson, watched him anxiously. "How are you going to react?" she asked softly. "I'm not going to shout or fight. But she needs to understand that we can't treat our family like this," replied Mr. Johnson, his voice firm but calm. The children, meanwhile, had retreated to their room, silent but shaken by Emily's arrogance. Seeing someone behave this way towards their family had shocked them, and a mixture of fear and injustice hung in the air. Mr. Johnson knew his reaction couldn't be impulsive. He had to be strategic. Every action had to send a clear message, but without crossing the legal line. He spent the evening thinking, planning. The idea of simply barring access or complaining to the neighbors seemed insufficient. Emily Thompson needed a more definitive lesson. He then made the radical decision: the swimming pool had to be made inaccessible, not out of raw anger, but through an irreversible and symbolic action. The gesture was not intended to harm the family or the neighborhood, but to protect his dignity and that of his family. Meanwhile, Emily, carefree, shared photos of her afternoon in the pool on social media, boasting about her daring and her humor towards the Johnsons. She was completely unaware of the silent storm that was brewing. This quiet anger, nurtured with respect for his own family, marked the beginning of a lesson no one in the neighborhood would forget. Mr. Johnson didn't need to shout or threaten. His strategy would be subtle, relentless, and final. As night fell, the Johnson house was bathed in a soft light, a stark contrast to the silent storm raging within Mr. Johnson. Seated in his study, surrounded by plans of the property and detailed notes, he considered every detail. The swimming pool, once a symbol of relaxation and family time, was to become a tool for protecting their dignity. "We cannot be satisfied with a simple warning," he murmured to Sarah, who was observing him with concern but confidence. "You mean, cement it?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes. It will be final. She will finally understand that you can't violate our space and mock us with impunity. But it will be done legally, with professionals. Nothing can be held against our family," replied Mr. Johnson, his gaze determined. The plan was meticulous. He needed to hire reliable workers, capable of working discreetly, and plan each step so that the pool's transformation would remain invisible to the neighborhood until the desired moment. He made several calls, choosing tradespeople who understood the importance of confidentiality and efficiency. In his mind, he visualized each step: draining the water, thoroughly cleaning the pool, installing a sturdy formwork, and finally pouring the concrete. Each phase had to be perfect, not only to render the pool unusable, but also to prevent Emily Thompson from legally challenging the action. Meanwhile, Emily carried on with her life, carefree and provocative, sharing her exploits in the Johnsons' garden on social media. She laughed at the neighbors and ignored the Johnson family's quiet but relentless determination. Mr. Johnson, on the other hand, felt that every laugh from Emily was a countdown. The plan he was putting in place was not motivated by hatred, but by respect for his family and a quiet sense of justice, to show that no arrogance or racism would go unpunished in the face of integrity and dignity. The decision was made. The next day, preparations would begin, and the swimming pool, a symbol of intrusion and contempt, would begin its transformation into a silent monument of justice and respect. The following morning, Mr. Johnson decided not to act in secret for this step. He wanted to give Emily Thompson one last chance to understand the seriousness of her behavior. With Sarah at his side, he walked to the neighbor's house with measured calm, but a look of firmness in his eyes. Emily, already on her terrace with her coffee, saw the Johnsons approaching. A mocking smile stretched across her lips. "Well, look who's coming to greet us," she exclaimed, thinking it was just a simple neighborhood visit. Mr. Johnson stopped in front of her, his voice calm but firm. "Emily, I need to talk to you. The pool, it's not a public space. You don't have permission to use it. And what happened yesterday, it was unacceptable." Emily burst into condescending laughter, crossing her arms. "Oh, come on, it was just for a bit of fun. You take yourself way too seriously." Mr. Johnson took a deep breath, without betraying the anger that was simmering inside. "This isn't about having fun. It's about respect, dignity, and knowing where your boundaries are. What you did yesterday was an intrusion. You humiliated my family in front of the neighbors and our children." Emily's smile faded slightly, but her arrogance remained intact. "You're exaggerating. It's just a swimming pool. I wasn't hurting anyone." Mr. Johnson, looking straight into her eyes, continued. "You may not see the harm, but it's there. And if you choose to ignore this warning, there will be irreversible consequences." Emily, perplexed but proud, didn't reply, thinking it was an empty threat. She left a few moments later, convinced she had nothing to fear. No sooner had the door closed behind her than Mr. Johnson turned to his wife. "She still thinks that anything goes," he murmured. "Well, she'll soon understand that we're not joking," replied Sarah, a slight smile on her lips. This confrontation temporarily calmed her anger, but confirmed that further action was necessary. The pool would not remain a playground for Emily's arrogance and racism. Preparations to cement the pool would begin, and this time, there would be no room for error or impunity. Night had fallen on the neighborhood, enveloping the streets in a deceptive calm. The lights of the houses shone dimly, but behind the shutters of the Johnsons' house, discreet activity was underway. The workers chosen by Mr. Johnson were arriving with the necessary materials: concrete, formwork, heavy tools, but everything was carefully wrapped so as not to arouse the neighbors' suspicions. "Are you sure no one can see us?" asked one of the workers, a little worried. Absolutely. Everything must remain discreet. And remember, this operation must be perfect and final, replied Mr. Johnson, impassive but firm. Sarah looked at her husband with a glimmer of pride in her eyes. You're doing this for our family, and for our children. Exactly. They need to understand that no one can violate our space and disrespect us, he said, before checking the plans one last time. The workers began by draining the pool, removing the water with silent precision. Every movement was meticulously coordinated. Next, they cleaned the basin, preparing the surface for the formwork. The work progressed under the cover of darkness, each hammer blow resonating like a symbol of impending justice. Meanwhile, Emily Thompson, still unaware of what was happening, posted photos of her latest dip in the pool on social media, boasting about her daring and her disdain for the Johnsons. Her arrogance unwittingly fueled Mr. Johnson's determination. The hours passed, and the concrete began to be poured, slowly filling the basin. Each liter of concrete represented a barrier against arrogance, a protection for family dignity, and a silent but clear warning: no intrusion would go unpunished. The secret construction site became the scene of an almost palpable tension. The neighbors, intrigued by the noise, cast discreet glances, but none could guess the scale of the operation. In that quiet night, the swimming pool was transforming before their eyes into a silent monument to justice and resilience. When the first rays of sunlight appeared, the concrete was poured and the pool was nothing more than a hard, smooth surface, ready to send an irrevocable message to Emily Thompson. Mr. Johnson, exhausted but satisfied, observed his work. He knew the lesson had been carefully prepared and could not be ignored. As the Johnsons finished pouring the concrete, the first neighbors began to notice unusual activity. The sound of tools, the discreet comings and goings of the workers, and the intense activity behind the closed shutters aroused curiosity and whispers. "Did you hear that noise last night?" Mrs. Carter asked her husband, pointing at the Johnsons' house. "Yes, it seemed to be coming from their garden. But I don't know exactly what they were doing," he replied, intrigued. In the neighborhood, some were beginning to wonder if the Johnsons were having technical problems with their pool. Others, aware of Emily's reputation and provocative nature, suspected it might be a reaction to her behavior. Quiet conversations on the streets fueled a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and quiet admiration for the Johnson family. Meanwhile, Emily Thompson continued her provocations on social media, unaware that her actions were about to trigger irreversible consequences. She shared photos of her pool escapades, boasting of her audacity and impunity. Each post only strengthened Mr. Johnson's quiet but relentless resolve. "She always thinks she's above the rules," murmured Sarah Johnson, watching the workers finish the finishing touches. "Yes, and she's going to learn that respect is not optional," replied Mr. Johnson, a slight smile on his lips. As the work neared completion, the swimming pool had completely disappeared beneath the smooth, hard concrete. It was no longer a place of relaxation or a playground for arrogance. It had become a symbol of protection, dignity, and quiet justice. The neighbors, seeing the solid surface, began to murmur among themselves, some immediately understanding the message. In this neighborhood where appearances and etiquette mattered so much, the Johnsons had just scored a discreet but brilliant victory over Emily's arrogance and racism. The moment when Emily would discover the transformation was approaching, and with it, the inevitable confrontation with a reality she had never considered. The next morning, Emily Thompson, true to form, headed to the Johnsons' pool, eager to relive her moment of social media glory. She could already picture the selfies, the videos, and the admiring comments from her followers. But as she approached, her confident smile instantly froze. The pool was gone. In its place stretched a smooth, gray, impenetrable surface. The concrete reflected the first rays of sunlight like a cold, unforgiving mirror. Emily stepped back in disbelief, lightly tapping her foot on the hard surface, as if she could magically find the water again. "What the?" she choked out, her voice trembling with disbelief and anger. "Impossible, they didn't dare," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. The Johnson children played quietly behind the house, while Mr. and Mrs. Johnson watched Emily from the terrace, their faces impassive but marked by quiet satisfaction. No words were needed, the message was clear and irrevocable. Emily tried calling some neighbors for support, but the responses were polite yet distant. No one could dispute what was legally the Johnsons' property. Anger rose, but it was quickly replaced by a mixture of shame and confusion. For the first time, her arrogance had met with a real and tangible consequence. "But I could still have fun here," she cried, realizing that her privileges and sense of impunity had just crumbled. "No, Emily. It wasn't your space." "You realized that too late," Mr. Johnson replied calmly, looking her straight in the eye. The contrast between her rage and the Johnsons' serene calm amplified her humiliation. What she thought was a simple game had turned into a life lesson. Respect and dignity are never optional, and arrogance never goes unpunished. The Johnson family, for their part, regained a profound serenity. The concrete pool was not merely an object of protection, it became a tangible symbol of their quiet strength, their patience, and their ability to transform provocation into silent but brilliant justice. Emily, for her part, remained rooted to the spot, unable to find a word, an excuse, or a way out. This moment marked a definitive turning point, the end of her impunity, and the beginning of a profound sense of regret. Emily Thompson couldn't believe her eyes. The pool, once the scene of her provocations and arrogance, was now cemented over, hard and irreversible. Furious and humiliated, she rushed to her neighbors and social media to tell her side of the story. "You'll never guess what those Johnsons did to me," she posted on her social media accounts, accompanying her message with photos of the concrete pool. "I've never been treated like this in this neighborhood." But the reaction was far from what she had hoped for. The neighbors, informed of the situation, sided with the Johnsons. Some commented discreetly. She was just intruding on their property. She got what she deserved. Finally, someone who defends their property and their family. On social media, Emily's posts were met with a mixture of mockery and harsh criticism. Internet users, discovering Emily's history and provocative past, criticized her for her arrogance and disdain for the Johnson family. Emily, stung to the quick, then tried to justify herself. "That's not fair. It's my right to have fun. You don't understand, I haven't done anything wrong." But his words fell on deaf ears. The implacable calm of the Johnson family and the support of the neighborhood only amplified his own humiliation. Every comment, every glance from a neighbor was a reminder that his provocation had reached its limit. It was a moment of revelation. Emily understood that dignity and respect are values that even arrogance cannot escape. Her attempts to salvage her image or justify herself only accentuated her public defeat. The Johnson family, for their part, remained silent but victorious. Their message was clear: no intrusion, no provocation, and no contempt would go unpunished. Their composure in the face of Emily's storm of anger amplified the force of their action and conveyed a powerful, dignified, and definitive lesson. For the first time, Emily fully felt the weight of her actions. The concrete pool was no longer just a physical obstacle, it embodied silent justice, quiet strength, and dignity defended with intelligence and courage. A few days after the discovery of the concrete pool, the entire neighborhood began to understand the significance of the Johnsons' actions. Neighbors who had discreetly observed the construction or heard about the incident now shared the story, not as a mere news item, but as a lesson in respect, dignity, and the limits of arrogance. In the Johnsons' garden, Mr. Johnson gathered his children to calmly discuss the incident. "You see, children," he began, "it's important to defend what belongs to us, but above all to protect our dignity. No one has the right to disrespect us, regardless of their age, money, or arrogance." The attentive children understood that it wasn't simply a matter of the swimming pool. It was a life lesson, knowing how to set boundaries, acting intelligently, and never letting injustice or meanness go unpunished. Sarah Johnson added gently, "And remember, it's not about punishing someone in anger. True strength lies in remaining calm, reflecting, and acting justly." That's what we did with Emily. Throughout the neighborhood, the story spread like a silent but powerful lesson. Neighbors understood that defending their space and their family didn't mean being violent or vindictive, but rather being resolute and clear in their actions. The act of cementing over the pool became a symbol of quiet justice, a measured but definitive response to arrogance and racism. Even Emily, publicly humiliated, began to understand the extent of her arrogance and actions. The Johnsons' message was simple but unforgettable: dignity and respect are never negotiable, and every intrusion has consequences. The swimming pool, now transformed into smooth concrete, served as a silent and permanent reminder to all those who dared to defy the Johnson family or disrespect their space. It was no longer simply a pool of water, but a symbol of strength, patience, and justice. In this neighborhood where everything seemed superficial and calculated, the Johnsons' actions had revealed true power, that of calm, reflection, and determination to protect what matters most. After several days of silence, Emily Thompson decided it was time to speak out publicly. She visited a few neighbors to tell her side of the story, hoping to gain their sympathy and salvage some of her tarnished image. But what she found was very different from what she had expected. The neighbors, well informed of the incident and admiring of the Johnsons' actions, listened politely, but their gaze was cold and detached. "Emily, you were never allowed to be here," said Mr. Carter, a respected neighbor, calmly. "We cannot defend someone who violates the property of others," added Mrs. Carter. Each attempt by Emily to justify her intrusion and arrogance was met with either a heavy silence or firm but polite replies. Her face, once self-assured and haughty, began to show signs of profound humiliation. On social media, the situation escalated. Emily's posts, which were intended to portray her as the victim, were ridiculed. Internet users shared the Johnsons' story, praising their patience, strategy, and intelligence. The comments highlighted the injustice of Emily's behavior and the sagacity of the Johnson family. "She thought she could intimidate us and get above the rules," Mr. Johnson whispered to Sarah, observing the storm of digital reactions. "She finally realizes that arrogance has its limits, and that dignity has its defenders," replied Sarah with a quiet smile. Faced with social isolation and a complete loss of credibility, Emily understood for the first time that her reputation had been destroyed not by violence, but by intelligence, patience, and quiet justice. Her arrogance had only served to amplify her own humiliation. The Johnson family, for their part, remained calm and serene. Their action, although radical, had sent a powerful message to the entire neighborhood: dignity and respect cannot be trampled upon, and every injustice finds its response, even if silent but irreparable. Emily Thompson, now aware of the magnitude of her defeat, could only brood over her anger and regret, while the community celebrated the quiet courage and intelligence of the Johnsons. A few weeks after the incident, the neighborhood seemed to return to its usual calm. But the transformation was subtle. Everyone now knew that the Johnson family was not to be underestimated, and that respect and dignity came at a price. In the Johnsons' garden, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson watched their children play near the concrete pool. The smooth, gray concrete was no longer a mere obstacle, but a tangible symbol of silent justice and quiet strength. The children now understood that the protection of their space and their dignity could be defended with intelligence and determination, without violence or excess. "Dad, I will never forget what you did," said the youngest, her eyes shining with admiration. "Neither will I," replied the elder. "And I will always know how to defend our family wisely." Emily Thompson, for her part, had retreated into the shadows of the neighborhood. Her attempt to regain a lost image had failed. Public humiliation and widespread disapproval had forced her to reflect, to become aware of her own arrogance and prejudices. Her concrete swimming pool would remain for her a constant reminder of her own powerlessness in the face of unspoken justice. In the neighborhood, the Johnson story became an example, whispered among neighbors. It symbolized the strength of patience, the importance of defending one's space and dignity, and the power of thoughtful justice. The pool, now encased in concrete, was no longer just an object, but a monument to perseverance, wisdom, and quiet courage. The Johnson family, gathered on the terrace, raised a symbolic toast to the restored calm and the lesson learned. No further words were needed, their actions spoke for themselves, louder than any confrontation or argument. And in this once superficial neighborhood, a clear message had taken hold: dignity and respect are never negotiable, and those who dare to flout them will learn sooner or later that they are not invincible. Peace had returned, solid and serene, just like the concrete of the swimming pool, which now told everyone the story of a family that knew how to defend what belonged to them, with intelligence, courage and determination.